There's a hobby that I've picked up over the years. It's called flipping through the network televisions for a good news source. I really like news, right? A lot of information that's presented there, a lot of things that apply to my life, things I can take. And, generally speaking, it's uh, mm, very uplifting information that they present, right? I mean, people love each other. There's no riots anywhere, no murders reported. There's no conflict in the city council meetings. Our politicians all get along and respect each other. Uh, everybody does it. There's no issues with school, no bomb threats in school. Nothing bad ever appears in the news. What channel do you watch? Exactly. The news lately has become depressing. And I don't know if it's always been depressing or I just suddenly started realizing it was depressing. I don't know which one it was. But wow, you turn on the news and you hear everything that's going on. And very rarely, when you end your half-hour TV show of the news, the local news, very rarely am I upbeat about the direction our society is going. It just seems it's all negative. It does. It's all bad. So the question then is, why do I watch the news? Why do I constantly subject myself to depressing stuff? I don't do that with my entertainment TV, right? I mean, if the football game is bad, I turn it off, right? And it's just reality, okay? I don't like depressing stuff. So why do I continue to watch the news? Why do many people continue to watch the news despite these negative things that come out of there, the depressing news? And I think it is just so we can plan our lives. You read about a riot happening downtown, you make a note to yourself, I'm not going down there. You see problems associated with the city council, including a bill that might raise your water rates or whatever. Suddenly you start thinking, okay, how can I start saving money that way? You start seeing these people fight and you start going, okay, who do I vote for? Right? Information is why we look for the news. We go there to gain a better understanding of how to live our life. The same is true with the Apostle Paul as he wants to tell Timothy. And as we continue our study in the book of Second Timothy, we've come to a point where now Paul is going to send Timothy a warning. Start at chapter 3. It basically says, guess what? Rough times are ahead. Rough times are ahead. Do well to avoid the evil in the coming times. And it's just a really principle that we need to understand. We do well to avoid it. So if you can turn with me to Second Timothy chapter 3, and we'll read the first couple of verses in there. And it's kind of going to interrupt the flow of the period, and we'll just kind of examine these things. But just a real quick statement here to be made on the difficult times. Paul wants Timothy to know these difficult times are coming. It's a very interesting statement. The very first three words, but know this. That is an imperative in the Greek sense. That basically means it's a command. Paul is telling Timothy, you must understand. Okay, it's not a suggestion. It's not like, I think it's going to happen, or this is kind of a generic description of what's going to be. No, Paul wants Timothy to not only understand, to prepare, to feel, to grasp, to know, and to live this reality. So what he says is, hard times will come. Know this. Imperative command. Know this fact. Grasp it, cling to it, hang on to it with everything you have. Hard times are coming. In essence, he's telling Timothy, prepare yourself. What are those last times? Well, he says they'll be in the last days. But then he continues in verse 2. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, proud, demeaning, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, without love for what is good, traitors, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to the form of godlessness, but denying its power. Avoid these people. Very interesting little passage there. He says, rough times are coming. Things are going to be there. And it's something we need to know. The difficult times need to be understood. Now, what's fascinating to me as I look at this is that last days things. I do not believe this refers to, if you will, the end times, right? He does not specifically state that, but I just don't think it do. I think every generation has had a point of view that said they have difficulty, right? Every generation has faced some sort of difficulty with people, with their times, with circumstances outside of their control. Every generation has. And so we're not something so new to us, if you will. Every generation faces this. And it seems like the following generation thinks they're improving, and then they also have their valleys of where it gets worse. And it seems like perhaps I'm wrong, but sometimes it goes kind of like a ebb and flow. Some generations better than others. Some generations seem to have lower points than others. In general, however, I think it's a downward trend. We've been getting worse, not better, as an overall humanity. But I don't think Paul is telling us that this refers directly to the end times. I think he just says in the later days. In other words, as it gets further and further down into history, difficult times will exist. It's very interesting, that word difficult, because I don't fully grasp this. Other translations will use the word hard or harsh or stressful or desolate. To me, it reminds me a little bit of a video game. You know, I used to play 20 years ago. You have a setting in there. You have your beginner, your middle, and your hard levels, right? And you can pick and choose. And, you know, if you really want to just have a good time, relax, not do anything, you always chose the beginner level. And if you wanted a more challenging one, you would adjust it accordingly. Well, what Paul's basically saying is life as a video game has automatically been set at a difficult level. You have to understand everything's going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge for you. Every believer sees the world getting worse, not better. That is one unifying thing about the church across the board. There is nobody out there in God's church that sees the world getting better. But out of that, Paul gave Timothy this statement. Know this, hard times are ahead. And the reason he wants to do that is for two things, I think. The first one is to give him hope. It's crazy to think about, but it gives you a standard to which you know is coming. God's in control. We know that. God's with you. We know that. And Paul's just finished telling Timothy, right, to endure the hardship. He talked about the three ways that hurt a Christian walk or mentality, right? I mean, he talked about, you know, the persecution. He talked about issues from within the people, and he talked about interpersonal relationships. Paul's telling Timothy, hard times are coming, right, from the world. We've already told you to endure like a good soldier. Now it continues. These times will be difficult. There will be a time. It properly defines the time in which we live. We know this. And he does it so we're not surprised. There's nothing worse than being surprised. I mean, I get this all the time at work, right? Someone walks up behind me and taps me on the shoulder. I scream and each and fly about 6 feet up in the air and come down. Yeah. Nothing worse than that, okay? And then, of course, everyone has to relive that for about 5 minutes, you know. Nothing worse than being surprised. That's one of the reasons Paul's telling Timothy this. to give him that end tunnel, the sight that says, in the end, God wins. But to get there is going to be a while. It's going to be a charge. He's telling him to endure. Give him some hope. He's not surprised. Times are going to be difficult, but why will the times be difficult? There's the question to be asking. And he says that in verse 2. He says, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, proud, demeaning, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, without the love for what is good, traitors, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to the form of godliness, but denying its power. I don't know about you, but I think he described all our politicians right there. Coming time will be because of people. The difficulty levels we have are not because of circumstances, not because of the government, not because of a singular individual. Now, that's got to be something kind of shocking to some people, right? Because they envision a singular person being responsible for a lot of bad things. In Paul's day, it was Nero, Emperor Nero, right? Half the city of Rome burned down. He blamed the Christians. And he, of course, proceeded to persecute him, drive him out, kill him every which way he can, light him on fire. He was a wonderful guy. It's easy to pick one person and say they are responsible for a lot of bad things that happen. But the fact of the matter is, it's not one person. It's people in general. Every last one of them. And who are they? Well, I can say without problems that these are non-believers. Because, just simply put, the fruit of the Spirit found in Galatians is not located in these individuals. This is like the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit, right? We know the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, right? You take a look at this, and it's quite frankly how it is. It's without self-control, unloving, unholy, ungrateful, disobedience to parents, proud, boastful, lovers of self, lovers of money. This is the exact opposite of the fruit of the Spirit. What does that tell me? It tells me one thing. It says, people, your average daily Joe that drinks coffee in the street corner, is the exact opposite of the Almighty. We look around this world and we see people in general and we want to assume the best. I do. I want to assume there's a reason that caused somebody to become bad, right? I want to blame something that triggered whatever in their brain that caused them to do these things. But the Bible tells us it's not necessarily the case. Not all monsters that we think of in terms of evil are actually the ones they're talking about. It's everybody. It's everybody. Everybody is at the exact opposite of the Almighty. Another way to put it, as one theologian said, it means mankind is at war with God. They are literally, actively at war with God. Mankind has nothing in common with the Almighty. Crazy to think about. Non-believers. What can we summarize about these characteristics of them besides the fact they're at war with God? Well, one word summarizes all of it. You know what it's called? That one word is bad. These characteristics are bad. People in general are bad. That's what Paul's telling them. Some of these might be linked. There may be some similarities. I mean, obviously, you can say lovers of self and lovers of money. You can go ahead and say that's clearly self-centered point of view. You can overlap some of these, some of this descriptions of these people. You can do it. But the reality is, in the end, they run like liquid around one another. You ever poured a bunch of different liquids together? You try red food coloring, green food coloring, purple food coloring, and you put them all together, and they just kind of blend. And then you put a little bit of oil in there, maybe the oil stands out from the rest of it. Yeah, okay. I got little boys, we do experiments. Um, that's what we're seeing here. These characteristics are all the different shades of liquid, different types, and some of them mix, and some of them separate and they stay together. But in the end, when you pull them into the same bowl, they're all there in the bowl. And that bowl is referred to as bad. Or as some really smart person once said, birds of a feather flock together. That's what we can say. This is not a complete list of all bad things. Okay, I want to say that. I'm sure there's some that it missed. There may be some things in here that we need to talk about, and not everyone's going to exhibit every last one of them. That's the other thing. Oftentimes we go, what's the bad person? Here's our checklist of all these things. Okay, he's only got 3 of the bad, so he's only kind of bad. No. The Apostle Paul just says this is generic of humanity, and people are going to be doing it. Times will be difficult because people exhibit these very things. Not all of them, not everyone, but they will all exhibit some of them, multiple ones, perhaps some of the bad ones will do all of them. It's very fascinating. The behavior of people is what makes the times bad. It's the behavior. It is people. We think our worldly problems are associated with simple things like tornadoes, hurricanes, famine, whatever, right? Paul doesn't even touch on those. He talks about people, everyday people on the street corner, being the reason and the problem. So, how do you deal with these people? You know the times will be difficult because of them, so how do you interact with them? Last point in verse 5 right there. It says, avoid these people. That is a very unique thing to say given all of the rest of the scripture, right? We are called to be the salt of the world, a city on a hill that cannot be vanquished. We're supposed to let our light shine before men that they may see our good deeds and praise our Father in heaven. Right? Yet at the same time, we're supposed to avoid these people. Seems interesting. The word there, the Greek word, is otherwise translated in some translations as shun. Shun these people. And it has a very negative context in our mind. It basically means we keep them over there, we have nothing to do with them, and we focus only on God's elect over here. We keep a clear division between them and us. And some people actually believe that. They will go so far as to remove themselves from the world, form a like-minded community of people, and try to just live like that. I don't think that's what he meant. He does not say, do not love them. As Jesus said, we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves, right? That includes everybody. Paul says, avoid them, but he doesn't say, do not love them. Secondly, and this really doesn't pertain to us per se, but in other points in history when Christians have become powerful in a political sense, they tended to persecute the non-believers. They'd go out of their way to try to force conversions. Paul doesn't say that either. He doesn't say go to war with these people. Hey, don't go force people to be converted. He doesn't say attack them until they become one of you, right? He doesn't say that. Nor does he say accept them for who they are. He doesn't say, okay, just you do your thing, we'll do our thing. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say let things happen the way they want them to be and we'll do whatever we want to do. Paul doesn't say that either. He says avoid them. The idea behind that, I believe, means don't associate with them as a close friend. There is a gap between a believer and a non-believer. There has to be. Because your priorities will always be different. A believer's priority should, number one, always be to please God. Right? A non-believer priority, hopefully, is themselves. They want to please themselves somehow, some way. Two different priorities, always going to create a problem in the relationship. Paul says, don't become cozy and close with these people because what's going to happen? Well, as Pastor Bob Thompson once said, it's really hard to keep a clean foot clean once you stick it in a dirty mud puddle. You start associating with people and start being really close with them, your foot's dirty. Your foot gets dirty. You're going to pick up on their bad habits. You're going to pick up on their views. You're going to pick up on their things. It says, don't associate with them as a close friend. Keep them at an arm's length. Be polite. Show the love of God to them. When someone is hurting, you help them. When you can be a positive influence in their life, be that positive influence. But always remember, they're at war with God, and you're God's child. Always remember that stark difference. People, before they are saved, are at war with God. Those that have been saved are God's children. Keep that in mind. Do not be amazed when people treat you wrongly because you refuse to celebrate, to condone, to embrace that worldly lifestyle. Don't be amazed if they don't like you because you are not seeking your best interest of your own self. You say, well, I'm just trying to do right by God, and so I'm going to behave a certain way. The rest of the world sees that and they get uncomfortable. They will despise you, at best, persecute you, or even kill you, simply for that reason. Don't be surprised by that. Paul says to avoid these people, but he does not mean that we cut off all communication with them. He does not mean that we cease to show Christ's love to him. He does not mean that we cease doing our Christian duty to the unsaved world. We are still called to go, preach the gospel, make disciples. But he says, you just don't be real close friends with these people. You don't do those things that cause you to stumble in your own Christian walk. Avoid these people. Next week, as we continue, we'll find the reasons, some of the reasons why Paul tells us to avoid these people. But suffice to say, it is the people that we need to be wary of. As we have looked this morning, difficult times are coming. We need to be aware of that. We need to be aware it is the people that are causing it, and that we need to keep and maintain a healthy distance from them as we continue our walk. Because if we don't, our foot will get dirty. Our prayer should always be that in spite of the circumstances around us, that we continue to do our job effectively and communicatively with that lost portion of the world, while separating ourselves from it by relying on God to see us through. The difficult days are coming, but God can see us through. Let's close with a word of prayer. Sovereign and Almighty Lord,